Here's a quick production tutorial of an alternative synth metal song I wrote in about an hour in the vein of Architects and Spirit Box. Let's hear what it sounds like. So before we get started, my name's Alex. I'm an alternative rock producer based in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you like this content, please feel free to like and subscribe and reach out to me if you'd like to work on some music together. All that being said, let's take a look at the session. So walking you through the session here, the first thing that I started with on this was actually the guitar riff. So it's just here, I just recorded this twice and then panned it hard left and hard right to give it that really wide spatial sound. So here's what that sounds like by itself. So nothing too fancy, I'm just using the Nolly Archetype plugin on the Periphery Style Rhythm preset, which I just kind of detuned a little bit and tweaked a little. And then I'm also running it through some plugins just to bring it a little bit more forward in the mix, do some light EQing on this SSL channel strip. So after that guitar riff, I played around with a few different ideas with the drum beat because there's a few different things that I kind of thought of for this and I wanted to see what felt more natural to me. So as a drummer, I like kind of playing along to this on my acoustic kit and then programming the drums based off of what I come up with on the kit versus just doing it the opposite way, programming it out and then trying to learn it on the kit. And then if it does reach a stage of development where I want to record live drums, I can go back and record the real thing. But for now, I've just got these on the Modern and Massive plugin. So these sound really good on here, and this is kind of what I came up with just adding to the guitar riff. Really not adding too much effects-wise to this. Just a little bit of compression, the API 2500, which is my favorite compression unit for drums. You can kind of hear it just brings it a little more forward in the mix, gives it a little bit more aggression and punchiness. So after that, I actually just mirrored what I was playing on the guitar on a bass guitar. And it looks like I froze this, but what I did prior to that was just run it through this Ampeg amp by Universal Audio. And this is just a standard, really nice go-to rock sounding amp that's pretty tight, has a good kind of mid-forward presence in there. So adding that to what we've got already with the drums and guitars, here's what that sounds like. So really just beefing up the low end that the guitars aren't providing in there and then just doubling that with the bass helps give you a really tight rhythm section when it's combined with the kick drum and the drums. And then what I also did was double it with this bass synth, which I'll play this by itself here real quick. Sounds like an old video game, almost like a Dune kind of soundtrack type thing, but it's just a couple of saw waves that are inside of Ableton Live's wavetable. I just pitched it down from the MIDI that I had wrote on here. And then I've got this automated through different sections, so it kind of fades in and out. But basically, if I solo both the bass guitar and the bass synth, that's what these sound like. So it kind of gives a nice kind of hybrid feel to it because you've got that acoustic element coming from a live bass, but you've also got the synthesized element coming from these two saw waves that are kind of bringing it into a little more digital territory. And then with that one, as far as the structure goes, I just added some different chords on here and played around with some different progressions that mirrored the guitar riff. So I've got a couple different synth pads going on at various points of the song. So just to start off the song, I have this first one that's a little bit more of a choral sound. And then later on in the B section of the song, I've doubled that with what I've called this airy pad. A little more ethereal sounding, but when combined, these give a little bit more kind of synthy territory. It just sounds a little more, I don't know, spacious, I guess you could say. And then I've also added in this pluck that doubles the guitar as well. So with just these synthesizer elements, you can hear what that sounds like. And again, this pluck here is just mirroring what the guitar riff is doing. Just a saw wave that's got a kind of pluck envelope on here. Not doing anything super fancy on this, just giving it a little bit of width. with a chorus and a reverb unit, then giving it a bit of saturation to help it kind of mimic that guitar tone a little bit more of that distortion. So really, if I solo the bass synth here, these are all the electronic elements that are going on, and this almost sounds like a video game soundtrack or an electronic song on its own. And I think this is something that's important in this kind of genre, is to have this almost fully produced electronic background noise, for lack of a better terminology on there, to have that doubling some of the acoustic elements, because when that combines with the other elements, the live bass, the live drums, the live guitars, you get a little bit more of that kind of dichotomy that's playing between the stuff that's played by a human and then the stuff that's more a synthesized element. So that's a little more kind of coming from the nu metal theory that came out, in the early 2000s or so. Bands like Linkin Park and Korn really played around a lot with synthesizers and electronic sampling to add that into their music to give it some extra textural background. So with the main A section here, or the hook that we've already gone through, I then went ahead and made a B section, which is basically functioning as a makeshift verse. So if I play this, you'll hear that it sounds like a little more chilled out, laid back kind of vibe to it, and it's not doing quite as much, which makes it so that when it goes into the final section of the song here, it's hitting a lot harder because you're stripping back a lot of the elements in the secondary B section or a verse section to go into the chorus or the main hook. So here's what this sounds like on its own. See on here, I'm bringing in a lot more of the electronic elements. Both of the pads are going at this point. Adding in the piano that's playing those chords. Stop it here with the riser. And then it's also interesting to note a couple different things on here. So whereas in the main hook, I've got the guitars double tracked and panned hard left and hard right to give you that sense of width, in the verse section here, it's really just a mono guitar panned dead center. So there is a little bit of reverb and delay on here just to give it a little bit more spatial development, and I'll let you hear what that sounds like. Just nice open picking on here. And what's interesting is that this is doubled with just the bass on here playing the root notes of what's being played on the guitar. So on its own, it's a lot more sparse than what's going on in the previous section. When you add in the drum beat here, it's also less of a manic pattern. More laid back, just kind of more of a backbeat on the hi-hats. Then you've got the crash accents. I also took out the synthesizer bass on here, so it's a little bit more pulled back, which again you want so that when it goes back into this main section, it's going to hit a lot harder. So some other things to note, I just have a different variation of the pluck that's going on in here. With this one, I believe this one is just a sine wave, so by itself it sounds like this. So it's a very delicate kind of pluck sound on here compared to the pluck sound that comes in later on here, which is definitely more aggressive, but that's meant to also blend in with the guitar. And then some other things that I've added in this section that are introduced because they're also being used in the final chorus or the outro here is the piano on here. So it's just this big spacious sounding piano that's mirroring the guitar chords that are implied. Double that with the pads. Bring back in the verse pluck. And then I've added in these little beeps here. So these beeps are actually just from a Native Instruments patch. It's kind of a modular unit. I believe this was from Reactor, and I just kind of resampled this into Ableton and chopped it up, pitched it around a little bit, and then I had that basically as just some little ear candy in the background there. And then another thing to note on this is that the main riff that's playing in the hook section, so in the A section and the C section here, even though it's not being played on the guitars in this verse, it's still being played at a much lower volume in the verse. So it's still sticking out as a memorable hook that you're going to be familiar with, not only from the start, but through the rest of the song. And then going into this last section, you can see kind of the way that I've arranged this here. So the pads that are both being played in this B verse section are still going to continue into the outro here, as well as these little beeps. and the piano on here. I've also got just some risers and some effects going into this final section, which I had in the beginning too. So with that, when this comes into the final outro, it hits a little bit harder, and then it's also reintroducing everything that you've already heard, but in multiple different instruments. So you not only have that full frequency coverage when it comes back in, but it's already stuff that you're familiar with, so it's a little more memorable for the listener. And this part here, with the exception of the added synthesizers, piano, and the little beeps that are going on in here, it's the same thing that was in the A section. And you can also hear that in the second half here, the drums are going into a halftime beat. And that's to create a little bit more movement and variation in that, which I'll play for you again here. So you've got the snare on the 2 and 4 on here, and then in the last half of the outro, it goes only to the 3. So it kind of implies a halftime feel. So listening to that. So you can hear that halftime makes it pulse a little bit more and give it a little cleaner outro in there. So the other things to note in the session, just as far as some of the plugins go, is this pad here is just an Ableton pad that I found, Frozen Rings, that I really like the sound of and use in a lot of my productions. This Airy pad is actually from Massive X by Native Instruments. This is a really cool synthesizer. This has a lot of patches and a lot of expansion packs that you can buy from it as well. Just have some pretty standard effects. I have a reverb, a dotted 1/8 note delay, and a 1/4 note delay on here as well. The reverb that I'm using is the ROM from Native Instruments. This has a really nice airy feel that works really great with synthesizers and pianos and just kind of brings the presence a bit more forward in the mix. And then I typically just roll off some of the low end on here so it doesn't get too convoluted in the lower frequencies. As I said, I've got some effects and some risers going in here, and then for my master bus, I'm really just doing some compression with this SSL style compressor, and then I'm running it through a tape machine here to kind of give it a little bit more of an analog feel. People say that, I feel like too much, but basically what that means is that this is rounding off some of the pokey transients that you would hear in the drums, giving it a little bit more thickness in the low mids, and then just smoothing things out a little bit more overall. And then I've also got it running into a limiter here just for a little bit more perceived volume when I'm in the writing stage. Other than that, I just reverse the guitar and bass notes that I let ring out and then reverse those so it swells into the intro of the song. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this through from start to finish. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and reach out to me if you wanna make some music, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.